If someone had told Michael Thornton that a single homeless man would one day break him to tears, he would have laughed in their face. Billionaire CEOs don't cry. Billionaire CEOs don't get broken. And they certainly don't hire men who sleep on sidewalks to drive their million-dollar cars. Yet that's exactly how this story begins. Michael Thornton was a billionaire CEO who had everything money could buy, but nothing that could make him feel truly alive. He commanded an empire of glass towers and endless profits, but his nights were sleepless and his victories were hollow. He was feared by rivals, admired by strangers, but despised by those who knew him best. And then came the day he shocked the world by hiring a homeless man to be his driver. Why would a ruthless billionaire trust a man with nothing? How could a ragged stranger enter a world of power and glass ceilings? And what would happen when their lives collided? The morning it began was bitterly cold. Michael emerged from his Manhattan penthouse, his suit pressed to perfection, his tie tight against his throat like a badge of discipline. Gerald, his chauffeur of 12 years, stood by the Rolls-Royce, gloves on, posture stiff. But something was different. His hands trembled as he reached for the door. "You're late," Michael barked. "No, sir," Gerald replied, voice unsteady. "I've been here since 5. I can't do this anymore." Michael froze. People didn't quit on him. They broke under his pressure, they begged for mercy, or they disappeared in silence. But no one walked away on their own. "You can't what?" Michael asked sharply. "I can't drive you around while you destroy lives," Gerald said, his voice suddenly firm. "My nephew was one of the thousands you laid off last quarter. He's got 3 kids. He's drowning. You don't care, but I do. I won't be part of this anymore." His words struck like a blade. Across the street, a journalist caught it all on a phone camera. Within an hour, the clip flooded social media. CEO humiliated by his own chauffeur. By noon, talk shows debated whether Michael was a corporate genius or a soulless tyrant. By evening, late-night hosts made him the punchline. The board was furious. "This is a PR nightmare," one executive hissed. Investors whispered about pulling out. Michael, however, sat in silence. His jaw tightened. His empire had weathered worse storms. "If one man can't handle the heat, I'll find another," he muttered. "Anyone can drive a car." That night, leaving his glass tower of an office, Michael spotted a figure slumped against the steps. Ragged coat, unshaven face, a battered notebook clutched to his chest. The man wasn't begging. He wasn't even looking up. He simply sat there as though the world had stopped noticing him long ago. Michael stopped. For reasons he couldn't name, his gaze lingered. "You," he said abruptly. "Can you drive?" The man raised his head slowly. His eyes, weathered and calm, seemed to cut through Michael's armor. "Yes," he replied. Michael tossed him the keys. "Then congratulations. You're hired." The next morning the world would call it a stunt, a circus act, a scandal. But it wasn't. It was the first step in a journey that would tear down the walls around Michael's heart, and one day bring him to tears. Michael Thornton was used to control, but for the first time in years he sat in the backseat uncertain of the man behind the wheel. He had hired executives worth millions, lawyers who could bend laws, and drivers who knew his moods better than his calendar. But now a homeless man, Jacob Miller, was steering his Rolls-Royce through Manhattan traffic as if nothing about the situation was unusual. Why would a billionaire trust his life to someone who lived on the streets? How could a man with nothing carry himself with such quiet calm? And what would happen when their two worlds finally collided? Michael leaned back, arms crossed, studying Jacob through the rearview mirror. The man's coat was torn at the sleeve, his hands rough and calloused, yet his grip on the wheel was steady. No fumbling, no hesitation. Almost professional. "You've done this before," Michael said flatly. Jacob's eyes flicked to the mirror, then back to the road. "I've driven," he said simply. Michael smirked. "Driven what?" "Shopping carts." Jacob didn't flinch. His calmness irritated Michael more than anger would have. Most people scrambled to impress him, to defend themselves. This man seemed immune. Outside, pedestrians gawked and pointed. The story had already hit the news. Billionaire CEO hires homeless driver. Some looked amused. Others sneered in disgust. Michael caught sight of a protest sign, "Stop exploiting the poor." He snorted. "They think I care what they think." Jacob said nothing. His silence filled the car louder than words. Finally, Michael snapped. "Well, don't you have an opinion? The world thinks you're my latest stunt." Jacob's voice was calm, steady, almost teacher-like. "The world thinks what it wants. What matters is what you think." Michael leaned forward, studying him carefully. There it was again, That unnerving dignity. This wasn't the desperation of a beggar. It was something else. Something Michael couldn't put his finger on. At a red light, Jacob's hand rested briefly on his battered notebook, tucked into his coat pocket. His thumb rubbed the corner as though it was more precious than the car he drove. Michael noticed but said nothing. Behind the glass towers, the board was already in uproar. In a sleek office uptown, Michael's executives argued whether he had lost his mind. "He's parading poverty like a circus act," one sneered. "This could sink us." Another warned, "He'll learn the hard way, compassion doesn't mix with profit." Back in the car, Michael broke the silence with a smirk. "You'll last a week. Maybe two." Jacob glanced at him through the mirror. His reply was simple but it cut deep. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll last long enough to teach you something." Michael stiffened. No one spoke to him like that. The light turned green. The car moved forward. For the first time in years, Michael felt he wasn't the one in control. And though he didn't know it yet, this quiet stranger was about to unravel everything he thought he knew about wealth, power, and himself. Jacob Miller looked like a man broken by life, but inside he carried stories that could shatter even the strongest soul. To the world, he was just another homeless figure drifting on the margins, a ghost in a city of glass and steel. But behind the rough beard and worn coat was a man who had once led classrooms, inspired children, and held a family in his arms. Why did a respected school principal fall to the streets? How could a man who once had everything lose it all? And what would happen when his hidden past collided with Michael Thornton's empire? That night, after dropping Michael at his penthouse, Jacob drove the Rolls-Royce back to the garage and returned to the shelter where he slept most nights. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled of disinfectant and weary bodies. Men shifted on thin mattresses, coughing in their sleep. Jacob settled into a corner, pulling his battered notebook from his coat. Its pages were filled with sketches, the faces of his wife and son, drawn from memory in lines that trembled with grief. He traced their smiles with his finger, closing his eyes as if the drawings could breathe them back to life. In flashes, the fire returned to him. Smoke curling under doors. The sound of shattering glass. His wife's scream. His son's hand slipping from his grasp. And then the cruelest cut of all, the insurance company's letter denying his claim on a technicality. Act of negligence, they called it. Fine print written by men like Michael Thornton, men who profited from other people's pain. The memory always left him cold. He pressed the notebook shut and bowed his head. For Jacob, survival wasn't about food or shelter. It was about carrying their memory in a world determined to erase it. Meanwhile, Michael sat in his penthouse, unable to sleep. For the first time, he couldn't stop thinking about the man he had impulsively hired. Who was he really? There was something in Jacob's eyes, something unsettling. They weren't the eyes of a beggar, but of a man who had endured more than Michael could imagine. The next morning, silence filled the car as they drove to Michael's headquarters. Michael scrolled through his tablet, pretending not to care. But his gaze kept flicking to the mirror. Jacob's posture was steady, his eyes focused, his hand again brushing the edge of that notebook tucked in his coat. "What's in there?" Michael asked abruptly. Jacob glanced at him in the mirror, expression unreadable. "My life," he said simply. Michael scoffed, but the answer lingered. For once he didn't know whether to laugh, dismiss it, or ask more. Behind them, the media circus was building. Every tabloid wanted Jacob's story. Who was this man? Why had the billionaire chosen him? And how long before the truth spilled into the open? Jacob drove on, silent as stone. But the shadows of his past were already creeping closer, and soon Michael would realize those shadows were tied to him in ways he never expected. Lily Thornton was the daughter of a billionaire, but she would have given anything not to be. While her father, Michael, bathed in wealth and power, she drowned in loneliness and resentment. She had mansions, private tutors, and designer clothes, but no real family. Her mother had left years ago, tired of Michael's coldness, and Lily was left with a father who measured love in bank transfers instead of time. Why would a teenager choose a stranger over her own father? How could a homeless driver become more of a parent than a billionaire? And what would happen when Michael realized he was being replaced? Lily had heard the headlines before she saw the man himself. Homeless driver behind the wheel of billionaire's Rolls-Royce. At first, she rolled her eyes, convinced it was another of her father's arrogant stunts. But when she walked into the garage one evening and saw Jacob polishing the car with quiet care, curiosity flickered. "Are you really homeless?" she asked bluntly, arms crossed. Jacob looked up, his eyes soft but steady. "Yes." "And my dad actually hired you?" "Yes." She smirked. He must be out of his mind. Jacob didn't laugh. Instead, he returned to his work, his silence more powerful than any witty remark. For the first time in a long time, Lily felt someone wasn't trying to impress her, or use her name. Over the next few days she found herself seeking him out. She sat in the passenger seat while he waited for Michael. She asked questions no one else dared ask her father's employees. What's it like out there? On the streets? Jacob didn't sugarcoat it. Cold. Lonely. But sometimes, the people who have nothing share more than those who have everything. Lily frowned. You sound like a philosopher, not a driver. Jacob smiled faintly. Life teaches differently when you lose everything. She wasn't sure why, but those words stayed with her. He didn't treat her like a spoiled kid or the heir to billions. He treated her like a human being, something her father hadn't done in years. One evening when Michael arrived home late, he found Lily sitting on the front steps, sketchbook in hand, laughing at something Jacob had said. For a moment, Michael stood frozen. His daughter hadn't laughed with him like that in years. What's this? Michael demanded. Lily looked up, defiant. Talking to someone who actually listens. The words stung more than he let show. But inside, Michael felt the first pangs of jealousy, not toward Jacob's wisdom, but toward the bond forming between his daughter and a stranger. Later that night, Lily told Jacob quietly, "You remind me of the dad I wish I had." Jacob didn't respond. He just looked away, his hand brushing the edge of his notebook, as though the memories inside were too heavy to share. Michael had thought Jacob would be a temporary inconvenience, but he was becoming something far more dangerous, a rival for his daughter's love. Claire Thornton was Michael's sister, but she had always believed she was the smarter Thornton. Michael built towers of glass and profit, but Claire built networks of influence in the shadows. She didn't sit at the head of the table, but she whispered into the ears of those who did. And when she saw headlines about her brother hiring a homeless man as his driver, she didn't see charity or scandal, she saw opportunity. Why would Claire undermine her own brother? How could a driver with nothing threaten a dynasty worth billions? And what would happen when family rivalry collided with the secrets Jacob carried? Claire had never forgiven Michael for inheriting the company. Their father had admired Michael's ruthlessness, his iron will, his ability to turn every weakness into a weapon. But Claire knew that willpower was brittle, it cracked when pushed in the right place. And Jacob Miller, the mysterious driver, looked like the perfect crack. At the next board meeting, Claire leaned in with her trademark smirk. "Our CEO thinks it's appropriate to place the company's image in the hands of a vagrant," she said smoothly, her eyes darting around the table. "What kind of message does that send to our investors?" Murmurs rose. Some agreed it was reckless. Others admitted the move had sparked massive public attention. But Claire pressed harder. Attention isn't the same as trust. This driver is a liability. Michael's jaw tightened. My driver is my business. You don't like it, resign. But the board wasn't so easily dismissed. They respected Michael's power, but they feared Claire's cunning. She whispered about Jacob's past. Where had he come from? What skeletons did he hide? One rumor planted, and suddenly Jacob wasn't just a story of redemption. He was a potential scandal waiting to explode. Meanwhile, Jacob remained oblivious to the storm gathering above him. Driving Michael through the city, he kept his composure, but in quiet moments his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. Lily noticed it. Michael ignored it. Claire hunted it. At dinner one evening, Claire cornered Lily. "You like him, don't you?" Lily's eyes narrowed. "He listens to me. More than Dad ever has." Claire smiled thinly. "Be careful. Men like him always want something." But Jacob hadn't asked for anything. Not money. Not favors. Not pity. His silence was the very thing that unsettled people like Claire, because silence can hide truths sharper than words. That night, Michael caught wind of Claire's maneuvering. She had already scheduled a private investigator to dig into Jacob's past. "You don't touch him," Michael warned, voice low and dangerous. Claire only smiled. "You're protecting him. Interesting. Maybe I should dig deeper." Michael's empire was built on control, but his sister was turning his newest decision into a war. And Jacob, whether he knew it or not, was now standing in the middle of a family feud that had the power to destroy them all. Michael Thornton thrived on secrets, but this time the secrets weren't his to control. He had silenced rivals, buried lawsuits, and crushed competitors who dared expose his methods. But Jacob Miller's silence was different. It wasn't empty, it was heavy, as though the man carried truths that could detonate at any moment. Why would a homeless driver's past matter to a billionaire CEO? How could a man with nothing hold power over someone with everything? And what would happen when those buried truths finally came to light? The first crack appeared when a headline hit the morning tabloids. Who is Jacob Miller? Homeless driver of Billionaire has troubled past. The article was thin on facts but thick with speculation. Unpaid debts, possible run-ins with the law, even whispers of negligence tied to a tragic house fire. Claire Thornton's fingerprints were all over it. Michael stormed into the boardroom, slamming the newspaper down. Which one of you leaked this? The directors shifted uneasily. Some avoided his eyes. Claire didn't bother hiding her smirk. If your driver's clean, why worry? Unless you've got something to hide too. Michael's jaw tightened. He couldn't admit it aloud, but Claire's words gnawed at him. For the first time he wondered, what was Jacob hiding? That night inside the garage, Michael confronted him. You've got a past. I want to know what's in it. Jacob froze, his hand resting on the worn notebook. Everyone has a past, he said softly. Michael stepped closer. But not everyone's past makes headlines. Tell me before someone else does. Jacob's eyes hardened. My wife and son died in a fire. The insurance company refused to pay out. I lost everything. That's the truth. Michael blinked. The words cut deeper than expected. For a moment he saw not a driver but a mirror, someone broken by the same cold machinery he had spent his life building. But before he could speak, Jacob added quietly, and your company was the one that wrote the policy. The air in the garage turned to stone. Michael's breath caught. What did you say? Jacob's voice was low, steady. Your insurance division. Thornton Mutual. The fine print in the contract, they called it negligence. Said I hadn't installed enough smoke alarms. They erased my family with a clause. Michael's stomach twisted. He remembered. Or rather, he remembered approving policies designed to deny more than they paid out. Profitable, yes. Legal, yes. But the human cost? He had never cared to ask. Now one of those victims was standing in front of him, holding his keys. For the first time in years, Michael had no words. The next day, Claire whispered her poison into the boardroom again. Do you see? This man isn't a savior story. He's a liability tied to our own scandals. If this goes public, Thornton Enterprises could collapse. Michael should have fired Jacob then. Cut ties, protected his empire. But he didn't. He couldn't. Because Jacob wasn't just his driver anymore. He was his conscience, one Michael couldn't silence. Lily Thornton had grown up in privilege, but she no longer believed privilege meant safety. Her father's empire bought her bodyguards, tutors, and homes in places others only dreamed of, but it never bought her the one thing she craved, love. Now she found that, strangely, in conversations with her father's homeless driver. Why would a billionaire's daughter confide in a stranger? How could a man with nothing give her what a man with everything couldn't? And what would happen when she was forced to choose between them? The tension had been brewing since Claire's whispers poisoned the boardroom and Jacob's secret clawed into the light. For Lily it wasn't a scandal. It was a story of survival, one she understood in ways her father never could. One evening, as the sky over Manhattan glowed with restless neon, Lily found Jacob sitting by the garage steps, his notebook in hand. Can I see it? She asked softly. Jacob hesitated, then handed it over. She opened the worn cover and saw sketches of a woman and child, drawn with trembling lines. Her throat tightened. They're beautiful, she whispered. My wife and son, Jacob said, his voice barely audible. Lily felt tears sting her eyes. You carry them with you. Jacob nodded. Every day. She closed the notebook carefully as though it were made of glass. You know, she said, you've done more for me in a week than my father has in years. Michael's voice cut through the night like a blade. What did you just say? Lily stiffened. She hadn't seen him approach. His face was stone, his eyes burning. You think this man cares about you? Michael demanded. He's using you. Using both of us. Lily rose to her feet, anger sparking. No, Dad. He's the only one who isn't using me. You don't get it, you never listen. Jacob listens. He sees me. Michael's jaw clenched. You're my daughter. You don't need him. Lily shot back. I need a father. Not a CEO. The words hung heavy in the air. Michael felt them land like punches, each syllable peeling back the armor he had worn for decades. But before he could respond, Jacob stepped between them, calm but firm. Don't blame her for saying the truth, Jacob said quietly. She deserves a father who shows up. For a heartbeat, Michael saw the ghost of his own failures. The wife who left, the daughter who drifted further away, the man in front of him who had lost everything because of decisions made by men like him. But pride was a cruel master. He shoved it down, his voice cold. "You're fired." Lily gasped. "No. If he goes, I go too." Michael froze. His empire, his daughter, his legacy, suddenly all of it hung on a choice he wasn't ready to make. And for the first time in years, Michael realized he could lose more than money. He could lose his blood. Michael Thornton was no stranger to scandal, but this time the scandal had a face, and it was his drivers. He had survived accusations of greed, lawsuits, and labor strikes, but those were faceless storms. This was different. The tabloids now had a name, a backstory, and a tragic fire tied directly to Thornton Enterprises. Why would the public sympathize with a homeless man over a billionaire? How could one driver's story shake the foundation of an empire? And what would happen when the world decided Michael Thornton was the villain? The story broke wide on a Monday morning. Billionaire CEO hires homeless driver whose family was destroyed by Thornton Enterprises insurance policy. The headlines spread like wildfire. News anchors replayed Jacob's tragedy. Talk shows framed it as poetic justice. Protesters gathered outside corporate headquarters holding signs, "Blood on Thornton's hands," and "Pay back what you stole." Michael tried to contain it. He ordered press conferences, carefully worded statements, and denials. But the damage was already done. Every soundbite made him look colder, every legal defense like an admission of guilt. Claire capitalized instantly. Standing before the board, she declared, "We can't survive this unless Michael steps down. He's no longer the future of Thornton Enterprises, he's the anchor sinking it." Half the directors nodded grimly. The others hesitated, their loyalty wavering under public pressure. Meanwhile, Jacob avoided the cameras. When reporters chased him, he refused interviews. "I'm just a driver," he told them. But his silence only deepened the intrigue. The world projected its outrage, pity, and hope onto him, turning him into a symbol he never wanted to be. Lily saw it all unfold and raged at her father. "You built this company on pain. Jacob isn't your problem, you are." Michael snapped, his voice sharp. "You think I built this empire by being weak? The world doesn't care about sob stories. They care about strength." But deep inside, the words rang hollow. Every protester's sign, every chant outside his office, every late-night headline whispered the same truth. His empire was being dismantled not by rivals, but by a man who refused to play his game. That night, Michael rode in the back seat while Jacob drove through a city buzzing with anger. Protesters lined the sidewalks, some shouting at the Rolls-Royce, others cheering Jacob's name. For once, Michael kept his phone off, staring out the tinted glass at the world that now despised him. "Doesn't it bother you?" he asked suddenly. Jacob glanced in the mirror. "What?" "That they've made you a hero. A symbol. You didn't ask for it." Jacob's grip tightened on the wheel. "No. But maybe the world needs reminders of what you've taken from it." Michael's chest tightened. He opened his mouth to argue, but for once he had no defense. The empire he had built on fine print and ruthless ambition was crumbling, and the man holding the steering wheel wasn't his employee anymore. He was his judge. And outside, the world was waiting for a verdict. Michael Thornton had spent his life conquering others, but now he was being conquered by himself. He had built an empire from steel, glass, and fear, but none of it could shield him from the collapse happening inside. His board was turning against him, his daughter was slipping away, and his driver, a homeless man, was forcing him to confront truths he had buried for decades. Why would a billionaire fear the judgment of a man with nothing? How could losing control feel more terrifying than losing money? And what would happen when the walls around Michael's heart finally cracked? The breaking point came late one night. After another brutal day of protests and boardroom wars, Michael returned to his penthouse. The skyline glittered like jewels, but he felt none of its glory. He poured himself a drink, stared at the reflection in the glass window, and for the first time admitted he no longer recognized the man looking back. The door clicked. Jacob entered quietly. He had driven Michael home, but instead of leaving, he lingered, sensing something was wrong. "You shouldn't be here," Michael muttered, eyes still fixed on the skyline. Jacob didn't move. "Neither should you." Michael turned sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means this," Jacob said, stepping closer. "You've got everything a man could want. But you've lost the only things that matter. Family. Peace. Humanity. You sit in this palace, but you're emptier than anyone on the street." Michael's hand trembled as he set down his glass. For years, he had buried the loneliness, the silence of an empty home, the failures as a father and husband. He had silenced them with profit margins and power plays. But Jacob's words tore through the defenses like glass shattering under pressure. Do you think I wanted this? Michael snapped, his voice cracking. Do you think I planned to be hated by my daughter? To lose my wife? To live with people fearing me more than loving me? Jacob's eyes softened, but his voice was steady. No one plans to lose their soul. They just stop noticing when it slips away. Michael staggered back, his chest heaving. I ruined lives. Your life. And I didn't even care. Tears burned at the edges of his eyes, but pride held them back. He gripped the window frame, knuckles white. What kind of man does that make me? Jacob stepped closer, placing the battered notebook on the table between them. A man with a choice. You can keep being the monster everyone says you are, or you can start making it right. For the first time in decades, Michael's shoulders slumped. His voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know how. Jacob looked him straight in the eye. Start by being human. The words broke something inside Michael. He sank into the chair, his head in his hands. And there, in the silence of his penthouse, the billionaire who had never cried wept like a child. Jacob Miller had been Michael Thornton's driver, but he was never just a driver. To the world he was a homeless man lifted into the spotlight, but to Michael he became a mirror, a rival, a conscience. Yet beneath the silence, sketches, and sorrow, Jacob carried one last secret that would change everything. Why would he stay by the side of the man whose empire had destroyed him? How could he forgive what seemed unforgivable? And what would happen when the final truth came out? The scandal had reached its peak. Protesters circled the headquarters. The board prepared for Michael's removal. Lily refused to speak to her father. Michael, though shaken, had begun small steps, drafting reforms, pledging programs for the homeless, even outlining new policies to erase the predatory practices that had ruined Jacob's life. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. Then one evening, Jacob handed Michael the battered notebook. Read it, he said quietly. Michael opened it, expecting more sketches. But the pages weren't just drawings, they were letters. Dozens of them, written to his wife and son after their deaths. Letters filled with grief, guilt, and forgiveness. One line stopped Michael cold. If the man who wrote our policy ever knew what his signature cost me, I hope he finds the courage to change. Because if he does, maybe I can forgive him too. Michael's throat tightened. You knew it was me? All along? Jacob nodded. The day you hired me, I recognized your name. I should have walked away. But something told me, maybe this was where I was meant to be. Michael stared at him in disbelief. You stayed. You drove for me. You listened to my rants. Why? Jacob's eyes glistened. Because the world doesn't change with anger alone. It changes when we face the people who hurt us, and give them the chance to choose differently. Michael's hands shook as he closed the notebook. For years he had measured his worth in billions. But now, in front of this man, he felt smaller than ever. And if I hadn't changed? Jacob's reply was simple, devastating. Then you'd still be the one living on the streets. Not me. The words landed like a hammer. Michael understood. Wealth had never protected him. It had only blinded him. Jacob, with nothing, had carried more humanity than he ever had with everything. In the final board meeting, Michael stood before his directors and announced, Thornton Enterprises will no longer be built on suffering. We will rebuild from the ground up. Some called it weakness. Others called it madness. But for the first time, Michael didn't care. Outside, he found Jacob waiting by the car. For once, Michael opened the passenger door and sat beside him. No longer CEO and driver. Just two men. As the car pulled away, Michael whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me. Jacob didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence had already spoken louder than words. And somewhere in that silence, Michael wept, not for what he had lost but for what he had finally found.